Hello, everybody. Here again with my car lecture because this seems to be the best time of day that I have to be able to get these lectures done. And it's much quicker for me to record these than it is for me to juggle my kiddo and writing out this lecture when we get home after school. So we are now at module 4. So we are in the last 4 weeks of coursework that we have. We'll have we're transitioning into this empirical view of what we've been looking at, right? So we know all this theory and foundation in this abstract way. We know the debates about structure and agency and how much does it matter on us, right? On our identities and our emotions. What are some I'm hesitant to say universal, but generalizable maybe traits that we all kind of do with our identities, like identity hierarchy, salience, verification, right? Those are things that we can generalize to all groups of people. We all have emotions. We all do emotion work depending on the circumstance. But then we're getting into module 4 where it's like, but wait, not everything is equal in this society, right? We're in a patriarchal, heteronormative society that has historical oppressive tendencies to certain groups of people, marginalizations of different groups, the power inequality between, the sexes, between the different ethnic and race groups that's going on, right? So these things, yes, are generalizable, but they look different for different people. And structure does matter, right? Agency does matter. Both of those things are there, but for certain people, they have more or less of that agency within the structure, right? So this module, we're getting into that. What does this look like for gender? What does this look like for race, ethnicity? What does this look like for undocumented folks, people with status issues? What does this look for people in poverty, right? So we're kind of taking these more at times contested identities, these kind of pieces of the puzzle that makes things just more complicated for some folks, that are really important for us to look at. So we're getting empirical now. We're getting to people taking these theories, going out and doing the research, and then applying these theories to their research and providing us with some answers, right? And some kind of what the field looks like in the real world, right? And remember, people act on the basis of their reality, and everything. The world is socially constructed. We're doing this together, but it also matters, right? Just because it's social constructed doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences. So this week, right, we're talking about gender. Really doing gender is our big thing right now. And doing is a really important part of this. So the ing makes it a process, right? It's something that's not static. It's something that's always happening. And it also means that it's constructed. We're doing it, right? It's not just there. We are actually doing gender. So I'm trying to get rid of this sun. So we're going to first read Barry Thorne, Border Work Among Girls and Boys. And this comes from one of her bigger projects, a book that she wrote. It's a really, really amazing book. She's talking about the difference between so I guess I should talk about the difference between sex and gender real quick, just to kind of, that gets convoluted in popular media and in just popular rhetoric. So sex is your biological differences. That's the thing that you're born with, right? Your anatomy, that's your penis, your vagina, your other reproductive organs inside of you. That is secondary sex organs that come out a little later. That's your hormones, right? These are things that are biological and that are there from the get-go. Gender, however, is the normative societal expectations and standards that go along with your sex, right? These change throughout history. These change throughout the times, throughout your age. So gender is not necessary. It's your masculinity and femininity that goes along with your biological sex. And so that is very much so socially constructed, right? We can see throughout history differences of attire, of demeanor, of wearing makeup, right? All of these things that are maybe more or less feminine or masculine have not always been so. And so right there, we can see the socially constructed nature of it. So for most of us, gender and sex line up quite nicely, right? We follow the normative expectations and standards of the sex that we were born with, so that my gender and my sex, for instance, tend to line up completely, right? So I do gender in the way that is normatively expected because of my sex, because of a female. So, of course, we are socialized into these expectations. Then I'm not born just because I was born a female into knowing that, you know, pink and purple and dresses and skirts and makeup and, you know, earrings and jewelry and being demure and caring and empathetic, right? Submissive, whatever these kind of typical female traits are typical of being female, because it isn't inherent in my genitalia, right, or my hormones. It is prescribed by society at large. So I'm socialized into that. I don't know that when I'm born, but slowly and surely, every day of my life, I'm learning what is proper and right and good for me being a female. And so this Thorne's border work among girls and boys, she goes into a few elementary schools, and she studies, she watches these elementary students, these different age groups, and in the book she talks about when she sees, right, she documents for years while she's studying these children, that there's a definite age where these kids start differentiating themselves by gender, right? And that becomes kind of their primary identities, where everything is not necessarily personal, like Susie and Bob, but she and he and girl and boy and cootie and those things that go along with it when you're in elementary school, right? So she shows us the construction and reproduction of gender norms, and the socialization of that, right? And so one of the things that she talks about is this border work, and that is that, you know, that thing that you're going to read about, which is the age where the kiddos start kind of differentiating themselves in that way. And she shows the kind of these generic social processes that begin to happen, that are really rooted in this socialization, but you can start seeing it at this time and during this age. So there's a quote on page 33, kind of this beginning little text that is by the editors of the book, not the writer of this, but it says, gender and the meanings of anatomical sex is not imposed on us by nature or by social structure. So to borrow from Bloomer, our femininity and masculinity are derived from what we do, not from what we are, right? So we do gender. We quite literally perform our gender. So I am not necessarily by nature empathetic and caring and into purple and pink and whatever, right? I do that. I perform that. I show the world that I am female through this kind of doing, this performance of gender, which kind of brings in, right, that Goffman, that dramaturgy, this performance aspect. And so then we're going to move on to, I want to say her name. It's Tibbets, but she has Chantel Ann Tibbles. I'm sorry, see, I messed it up already. The Tibbles piece, where we're going to come back to that question from module 2 a little bit more, kind of definitively, of that agency versus structure, right? So how do some of us resist restrictions that are imposed upon us by normative expectations of gender, by institutions and structure, right? So sometimes we can also use our gender to resist structure. Sometimes that structure imposes gender norms, and we can resist that as well by performing differently and utilizing these tactics that these authors kind of talk about. And so she found that although the groups use gender performance, both groups, so she looked at 2 different groups that you'll read about, they both use gender performances to their advantage, but in different ways because of the structure, right? And so this is a great piece for you to be able to connect some of that stuff from Module 2 regarding the structure and agency and be able to kind of really see it, how people utilize agency against the structure that is imposed upon them. So maybe keep an eye out for that during your module reflection too, right? Whenever you're reading, maybe make some notes that you can utilize in that module reflection. So they both resisted standardization by doing gender in ways that served their purposes, right? So there was kind of these imposed gender roles or rules, standardizations by this kind of serving industry, these like restaurants, but they did gender in a different way to be able to kind of get back some of their agency as well. So she brings up also another great place to maybe incorporate some Module 2, that identity week with this piece. She brings up the idea of role distance, and this would make a great comparison. We talked about roles during that identity week. And so what happens when you have that role distance? It's also a great place for that the emotions literature too. So emotions and identity in this piece have some really great points that you can utilize in those module reflections to do that compare and contrast, the extension of, right? So you can also talk, during the identity and emotions week, they talk about this and this, and then this person furthers that idea through an empirical application, and it looks like this, right? Give me the examples. Don't just say that they did this. Show me what they did. And then let's move on to that last piece, this one by Nikki Jones. And I don't have the piece with me to quote the exact article, but it's the article during this week, not the one that's not in the book, right? It's the article that I uploaded, who is going to kind of serve as this amazing transition between the gender week and the following week where we start going over race. And so she looks at, sorry, I wrote notes on a piece of, on a receipt, so it's a little bit hard to read. I had them written down at home, but I wanted to get this out for you so that you had it and were able to start your work. So she demystifies and contributes to the kind of gender, to a lot of other literature too that she talks about, but specifically for us, to the gender literature on, there's a lot of literature on male violence. So that's a gender, male, of course, right? A lot of gender work has been on females, or the differences between socialization into female and male roles. But so she looks at like, hey, we're looking at like violence, and we tend to talk about it in a masculine term, and like why males use violence, what the purpose of violence is for particular groups of males. She's like, but women use violence too, right? So she looks at these inner city girls and utilizes that information that we know about male violence, and then posits that these girls are also utilizing violence for their own purposes, and it's similar to the males but also different, right? And she shows both of those things. It's a really, really great read, and so I would really keep this one in mind, especially as you start reading as you learn about the next week, and on race. And so we're gonna keep that in mind about kind of how these identities are shaped and informed by these normative expectations, by the way that the context, right, where you live, the community you live in, how you grew up, and all of those things shape your identity and the performances that you're able to do, the decisions that you make, the emotions that you can have. Why do some people have to distance themselves from certain stereotypes or utilize stereotypes in a different way for their own purposes, right? We'll start learning all that next week. And so this one is a really great one while you read through to keep in mind, because it'll serve as a great transition into next week when we dive into more these identity issues as they pertain to race and ethnicity. Alrighty. So I'll try to post some questions this evening that can kind of help guide you, those questions and comments and things. Hopefully those are kind of helping you out whenever you're writing your modules, when you're reading these papers. There won't be very many because I think I said quite a few in this lecture. But yeah, email me if you have any questions. We got about 4 weeks left. I'll try to post another video about your module 4, which is coming up next week, I believe. You'll have an extra day for that. So I really, I expected these to be really good. So start working on them, email me, come by and see me so that we can get these, pounded out.